What is going on, folks? Aaron is back. We are talking Buffalo Bills defensive backs, but first, our guys at Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, I'm back from New York City. You're back on the show. All is right in the world.
I haven't talked to you in a while. I was telling you, like, even just getting set up, getting ready for the podcast, I felt like it's been too long. And so if I'm a little out of rhythm tonight, might be why. A little underprepared. I honestly didn't think I was going to make it here tonight for the show, but I'm the luckiest guy in the world. It all worked out, and here I am, and we can do this. I'm glad because you were not able to get a guest. I would have really let you down this week as opposed to last week where you were able to get through without me. Probably even better without me from some of the comments I saw. Great show.
Yeah, we Greg Boris jumped in one week. We got Hans Hansen jumped on to talk about Matt Milano, which obviously he was very excited.
Who wouldn't want to hear that?
But this week we're going to be talking about the Buffalo Bills secondary. We'll be going through the cornerback groups and the safety groups, and each week that we've jumped on here, we've kind of had news to go through. And I won't lie, this is the first time in a while that I scanned through multiple different tickers and multiple different transaction things, and
Josh Allen's not like on TMZ or anything this week. There's nothing.
I won't lie. I did not scan TMZ to see what
there might be
Mexican vacations he may or may not have gone on. How about this? Well, you weren't on when the Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane extensions were announced. Did that bring up any thoughts for you?
I mean, yeah. If you follow me on Twitter, you know I'm a big fan of Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. I love this because it kind of puts to bed this whole idea of that Super Bowl or bust, right? I keep hearing that keeps coming up, or that this window is somehow closing. I think it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to see out those contracts, right? Something could go wrong here, and totally coaches' money's not the same. They're not.
Yeah, coaches have been fired with plenty of years left on their deal.
Sure, but I think, and I had a lot of people tell me that, like, this isn't really an investment in them, but it's capturing the pulse of how the organization feels about them today, right? Like they feel that this is the plan going forward. That could totally change, and they have the leeway to get out of that. But to me, it tells me Terry Pegula is very happy with the way things are going, even though they haven't hit Super Bowl, they haven't been able to get over that hump. The Buffalo Bills right now, in terms of the NFL and other teams, they're good business. Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are good at their jobs in comparison to the rest of the guys, and he is rewarding them for that.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really smart way to put it, in the sense that for anyone who thought internally there was some kind of or else pressure, or there was some kind of internal hot seat, or that anyone in the organization, and honestly, all that really matters is Terry Pegula, but that Terry Pegula shared any of the same sentiments as some fans who do feel like they should be on the hot seat. Your phrasing of right now, that is simply not the case. That is not accurate. That is not how they feel. Of course, if there's a Josh Allen doesn't get hurt and they miss the playoffs, sure, lots of crazy discussion.
Fire up that talk.
Yep. We'll see where that goes. But I do think that was a great way to phrase it. That right now, that means he does not feel the same as many of those fans do.
No.
So as you have returned back to us here, I will let you choose tonight. Do you want to start with the cornerbacks or start with the safeties?
I think let's start with the safety group and work our way up. The picture for this was the safeties. I think it's probably the biggest story is how do Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer look together now that you're coming off of an injury season for Hyde that kept him out, and an injury riddled season for Jordan Poyer now coming into not hitting the market, getting the type of deal that he wanted. Was the league right about Jordan Poyer in the value, or did they underestimate him? He still got that value. Like, these are, in my opinion, the biggest stories when we're looking at this group.
Yeah. Jordan Poyer last year played 12 games, so missed 5 games. The first time really since he's been a Buffalo Bill that
Yeah.
he's missed significant time. And I think
And I would say, like, in the games he played, not even 80% healthy, like the types of
yeah,
injuries he
oh yeah.
had and how long that went
Well,
on.
heck, right up from training camp with that elbow popping backwards and then all the way through. And I think it's really easy to forget. Micah Hyde played 2 games last year. 2, and it was actually not even 2 full games. He got hurt
Yeah.
in the second game. So he missed almost the entire season. So now, just as a summary for the group, obviously we did bring back Jordan Poyer on a 2-year, very favorable deal, $4.8 million cap hit.
Mhm.
Micah Hyde, we have not played with his deal at all. He has his full cap hit, $10.5 million. In the last year of his deal, we'll see where that goes next year. I think it's very likely we see that extended as he goes in and likely maybe a little something to match up where he and Poyer could be on the same one. But we have those two. We still have Siran Neal. We still have Damar Hamlin. We, I guess you would say, still have Dean Marlowe because he was retained after being traded for.
Yep.
And then we had 2 lower level additions. Jared Mayden, I don't think has any realistic shot. And I think Zayne Anderson has like as close to my non-zero chance definition as anyone can get. I
Sure.
think we've had guys surprise in snagging that, oh, he's the extra special teams guy this year. Who was that linebacker a couple years ago that shocked everybody when he made the 53?
Oh my
It was like
God.
2 or 3 years ago. No one had him on their 53-man roster projection, and
Yes.
it was you know who I'm talking about. Somebody in the chat
I-
will probably remind us here. There's an outside shot that Zayne Anderson is that guy. I don't think he's going to, but he could. But the real addition here, and I want your opinion before we get into what it means to have Micah Hyde, Del'Shawn Phillips, Mike S. Great
Del'Shawn
job.
Phillips.
That
Yes.
was the one right there. No one had Del'Shawn Phillips on their
I think
53-man
Rico might have been the guy that
There we
was
go.
like a
There we go.
Del'Shawn Phillips dude.
Shout
Yeah.
out to Rico. Okay, credit for that making that call.
I think so. Yeah.
So the one addition before we get into what it means to have Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer healthy, and I think probably the fact that those two played a combined 14 games, they added Taylor Rapp. So let's start there before we get into how nice it is to have Hyde and Poyer back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of whispers and different people who have I guess projected that Taylor Rapp didn't just sign here to be the backup to Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you think is, just wishful thinking? How much of that do you think is true? Do you think that he they whispered to him about being a replacement for one of those guys, about introducing a package? I struggled initially and believed a lot of that, maybe still do believe some of that, I don't know, conspiracy or those whispers in that. Why did he sign a 1-year, $1.7 million deal here to be a backup?
Yeah, it's tough. First of all, I want to thank you for posing that like a real question and not just coming out here and being like, hey, how much is the ThiccDime going to be the newest thing in the world, right? So I applaud you on your professionalism there.
Thank you. I was proud of myself,
A real
to be honest.
question.
I was proud of myself.
But this one's a tough one for me, dude. This is one of these ones I'm really excited to see what happens in camp. I know you guys are going to be there covering. This is going to be one of the stories that I'm most refreshing for is how are the changes from a Leslie Frazier defense to a Sean McDermott defense, and how does that impact this addition like a Taylor Rapp? Because you're right, everything about it everything I know about Sean McDermott, the way that he and Leslie Frazier had run this defense, changes don't come in big, massive changes like this.
Depending on where you looked, you can find sources that, depending on what they called Siran Neal in the Chiefs games when he did technically come in, there are sources that will say we ran 0 dime snaps all of last season. I actually think we ran like a dozen.
There's a handful,
but you're talking about like a dozen out of 1,100 snaps. You're talking about less than 0.1%.
And changes have been incremental. They do make them. They pick spots. Like I have a hard time seeing this big radical type change. So, but you're right that deal doesn't also make sense. So that throws off some weird things for me. So I've had a really hard time wrapping my head around Rapp and what he is going to be to this team in this year. I see a path to your point of replacement, and I see it with both Hamlin and Rapp. I think that could be your poor man's Poyer and Hyde replacement if it doesn't go well this year, right? Because we do have to come back and talk about the health of those guys and what to expect from them. But Rapp, to me, at least gives you the insurance that if one of the two of these isn't able to be playing at the level they were, or faces the type of injuries that Poyer had last year, there isn't going to be the pressure on Jordan Poyer to have to play through that injury when you have a guy like Taylor Rapp that I think can come in and at least play at that level, whether or not there's packages for him in the dime. So it at least provides you with the insurance at a position you got super thin a year ago, where you're pulling guys off the street, guys that had no business playing in big games or playing in some big games. Yeah. This kind of buys you that insurance. And I think that maybe they made the investment on the insurance with the unknown of Damar Hamlin, because I do think he was that third safety going into this year prior to the injury that happened to him, which obviously they didn't know where he was going to be at come OTA. So I don't know if it was additional extra insurance to get a guy in you knew would be ready, or to your point and what others have said, is there going to be a pretty large dynamic change in how they deploy guys? Because Rapp's not going to take Taron Johnson off the field. If anything, you want both of them to kind of mirror what they can do with that nickel position. Maybe it has to do with the middle linebacker position. I'm not sure if it's going to be a big radical change or not, but I think we'll find out pretty early in training camp.
Yeah, so Rick here asking how old is Taylor Rapp? He's 26.
Yeah.
So early. Like, he's a guy that, and I will tell you, he was on when we proposed a list and had our free agent targets, when at the moment many of us, I don't want to speak for Aaron, but I was planning for the fact that, hey, we're probably going to lose Jordan Poyer. Yeah. Taylor Rapp was one of my replacement options. Like, he was number 2 on my list. Guys like Joe Marino had him as his top option to replace him. So then when we re-signed Poyer, I mentally moved on. And then the weird part was Taylor Rapp, he signed like the 3rd or 4th day of free agency. It wasn't a month in. It wasn't Poona Ford waiting to get his deal. Like, he agreed on like that Thursday of free agency to then come in at 1 year, $1.77 million after it. I could even see it if he signed first and then we got Poyer back, but he knew that we had Poyer back. So Stephen Burns here saying, yeah, this feels like get a guy in the building before you sign him long term. Bills can't afford to lose both theirs. I think that's a very reasonable approach, and I think makes a lot of sense. And I think it's somewhere in the middle.
Well, now you have all season to negotiate with him, right? Like, while he's in your 100%. Building, you can just have that negotiation going on and nobody else can. So you buy yourself that a little bit.
So I think that, one, there were probably some whispers of that, of like, hey, come in the building here. Our 2 safeties are 32 and 32, and they played a combined 14 games last year. Pretty good chance you're going to see.
And the neck injury is not a joke. That
correct. And we have no guarantees. And one plays like a psychopath when he's on the field and throws his body around with reckless abandon. Right. And the other just had a neck injury. And, this is not a joking manner. Our 3rd safety literally had to be resuscitated on the field. Right. So obviously that is, hey, there's opportunity here. And I'm going to introduce one other piece. Not crazy, like I joke around with a lot. I do think, I'm not going to say to the degree that I think Dalton Kincaid introduces 12 personnel and going from the least in the NFL to now, I genuinely think we're going to be above average in 12 personnel usage. So not going to the top of the league like the 49ers and Browns, but we won't be least in the NFL again. We're going to be average or above average in 12 personnel usage. I expect some shift from obviously least dime usage in the NFL, because some statistical sources will tell you we ran 0 snaps, to now that will be a tool in the tool belt. Now, does that mean that we see, 5% of the snaps, 10% of the snaps? That it would be, I'd be talking about that, hey, now, and especially, I know, you weren't here last week for Hans talking linebacker with me. We did talk about this idea in that, maybe there's less pressure on which linebacker replaces Tremaine Edmunds when we know that, hey, on 3rd and 8 plus, 3rd and 9 plus, we're actually going to bring in Taylor Rapp anyways. And that we don't have to worry about which linebacker it is. When it's 3rd and long, we're going to go with a dime look, because we know, and there is obviously Eric and Anthony and others have done some great breakdowns of how impactful Rapp is in that kind of dime linebacker spot. So I do think there's some package. We're not going to turn into some heavy dime usage team. It's not going to be half the defensive snaps, but I do think we go from literally 0 and the lowest in the NFL to now we will see some dime usage. I think we're going to see some dime looks, but like you said, this defense is slow to change. Maybe the shift from Frazier to McDermott sprinkles in a little bit of it. I won't lie. I did not look at the Panthers or Eagles dime usage back then, but that might be interesting to look at.
Sure.
Maybe McDermott has some history in doing that. But do you think that's reasonable? Do you think that there's a chance that we see at least a shift from literally none to now we will see some snaps there?
So I also want to frame this for everybody because I've always pushed back, right? Whenever you've tried to introduce dime, I push back like, man, I don't know. I don't dislike the look, right? And when they got Siran Neal in, I was watching his college highlights and things like that. My mind instantly went to this type of matchup guy that you could put in. Obviously, his career didn't take the career arc that we wanted to. Still great player. We love him on special teams. But
yeah, now it seems to be pretty clear. Matter of fact, we've talked this whole time. We haven't even brought his name up as an option, and he's our third highest paid safety. He's getting paid more than Rapp and Marlowe and Zayne Anderson and Damar Hamlin.
For sure. And the idea of him against the Kelsey, like all those things make sense to me of why to do it, when to do it. So to get to the point really is I'm not against it. It's just all the way I'm thinking is how Sean McDermott's deployed things in the past. But to the point, when he came here, he really revolutionized the way because of personnel, because of what Taron Johnson was able to do. He really revolutionized playing nickel defense the way that it's played now. And you're seeing teams roll that out. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see him on the trend of adding another DB to that mix, especially if it's a versatile one that's shown he can play that middle of the field. So I see all the dots that everybody's able to make a connection of. There should be more of these looks, and I don't disagree, but I got to see Sean McDermott do it. And that's where here in camp, I think early on we will see, if you start to see a bunch of DBs out there, this is going to be a part of the defense here going forward. And to your point, maybe it's not coming out and taking up 50%, but situationally in those third and longs, even in some known passing downs against teams, force them to do something different, dictate the looks to the defense or to the offense, because you've got those type of players. So I know I'm kind of on both sides of this argument a little bit because I'm pushing back, but I do see the picture. I don't think people are crazy for making that statement or trying to make Thickle think. I think ThiccDime, I still can't sign off on it just because I don't want you to have that win. But it does make sense to me to shift that way with the way the NFL is going.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That makes me feel better. I'll take that as like a half win. Heather here asking a legit question, because I think this is a fair question to ask. Are we just overestimating what Taylor Rapp is?
Yes.
Are we just like, is that a thing? And I'll explain in a minute here. That's a totally fair question. And I do think he is a flawed player. I don't think he's as versatile as what Poyer and Hyde have shown to be right now. It doesn't mean he can't be developed into that. They obviously, I think he was probably better than Jordan Poyer was when he came to the Bills, and is probably close to on par, maybe a slight notch below where Micah Hyde was when he came to the Bills, but he was in that range of player. Neither Hyde or Poyer were all pros or pro bowlers when they came. They were both backup type players when they came here. And Hyde was thought of as like a nickel only kind of player. So just some background, Taylor Rapp was a 4-year starter with the Rams. The last 2 years started every single game for them, started every game in their Super Bowl season all the way through. He did have his second year. He had some injuries, so only played 9 games, but otherwise has played 15, 17, and 16 games in his career. 194, 92 tackles, is always making a lot of different plays. He's had 9 interceptions, so he's a impactful player. There's been a lot of, I think fair criticism. He's not some matchup nightmare. He's not amazing in coverage. He's fair. He's fine. He's better as in my mind, the Poyer role, like that in the box role, where you'll see him. So I think Heather's question is fair in that approach to, are we getting too excited here? But I also think this wasn't just me. It wasn't just Joe Marino. I think the vast majority of non-Bills people, when you just looked at ranking free agents that were available in the marketplace, Taylor Rapp was one of the top 4 or 5 safeties listed out there for just about every team. So I think this was seen as a pretty savvy move and a confusing move. I actually knew some Rams coverage people who were kind of frustrated that they can't believe the Rams didn't offer him at least a little more than that to come back. And that they get it if the money was equal, maybe he wanted to go play for the better team, but they were kind of shocked at where that was. So it's a totally fair question, but I actually think he's pretty good. And I think most people and objective observers, people outside the Bills, not just rose-colored glasses, most people see him as a starting safety in the NFL and as a bonus to have as your third safety, where he would be starting on half the teams in the league, that kind of setup. So I think that was a fair question.
Yeah.
So I simply kept
rambled on
about him, that being a fair question. And
I do think
Taylor Rapp is I think most people see him as a starter in the league, not some all pro or pro bowler, but a starting caliber player, and having him as a third safety is pretty universally seen as a luxury to have.
Totally. I agree. I think here's the thing why I think people are trying to visualize him getting on the field is, especially with the removal of Tremaine Edmonds and not knowing who that other linebacker is going to be, it's hard, because I think he is that 10th best player or whatever it is, like that positionally best player would be available. Normally you would just defer to the linebacker because you had Edmonds and Milano. You didn't want to take either one of those guys off the field. And now it's really Milano's the only guy that you don't want to take off the field. And so I don't know if McDermott can make that
This one here is a big piece for me that Nikki G brings up, and both him and a couple others commented on it, that's a big piece that you can make that shift to feel good about coverage without losing the sure-handed tackling in the box. They can't just flip and run on you. He has no problem sticking his nose in there and making plays at the line of scrimmage.
I just don't know, does Sean McDermott trust that going that undersized versus the traditional idea of what defenses are? Can he break that next box of like what a traditional defense is? I don't know.
And that reason is why I believe and agree with you that we are not going to see a significant shift.
Right.
I do think it's too much for that to become, we're a new, 50% nickel, 50% dime, and it's half the snaps go to, Terrell Bernard and half the snaps go to Taylor Rapp. I don't expect that to be the case.
Yeah.
But if we get to the quarter pole in the season, and after 4 games, it's, oh crap, it's like 70-30. And we're actually running, they're bringing Taylor Rapp in a lot, and he's playing, Terrell Bernard is playing 40 snaps a game, and Taylor Rapp's playing 20 snaps a game. I won't be shocked. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I expect it to be closer to a 5 or 10% sprinkling than some new like primary part of the defense. But again, when our baseline was 0, anything will be more than what we used before, and I do expect it to increase. So that's easy to say, well, of course it's going to be more because we freaking ran 0.
And while we're still kind of staying here on the safety position too, I don't want to leave this group without giving some shine to Damar Hamlin, because he's gotten a lot of shine, obviously, for what he has overcome and even coming back at all. But I want to give pre-injury Damar Hamlin some shine, because I do feel when he got injured and not knowing like outside of the human stuff about that, I was very concerned for the long term of the Bills safety position, because you don't have anything after Poyer and Hyde. And when he was in and playing, I actually felt really good about the like just having to replace one of those pieces, because I thought he could come in, like maybe you can move on from Poyer and just ride Hyde and Hamlin. And I think that he could play at an acceptable level. And so having, in my opinion, 2 of those guys behind Poyer and Hyde, that Hamlin can step in. And I know I know there was some stuff that was on film last year that looked really bad, some missed tackles that looked very bad. But I think if anyone objectively goes back and watches the film of a guy getting reps for the first time in a pretty difficult defense, I think he held his own and can start at a starter level. And so I think you have two guys now in the safety position. We were just talking about, they were pulling dudes off the street last year. Now, I don't know if Hamlin's going to come in once he starts taking hits. We'll see how that progression goes for him. I don't know what that's going to be like, but assuming that he gets over that hurdle and is returning to play, this is a guy that was trending in the right ways last year. Like, he definitely left a lot out on the film. It left a lot out there for you to grab at and say, hey, he needs to clean up these things. But considering the situation he was in on the defense he played in, he still played at a winning level of football at safety position. So that should give people, if it is next year going into the season, Hamlin and Rapp, like, yeah, you're going to have a drop off from what we saw the last 2 to 3 years ago, but I don't know how big of a drop off it is from today, Poyer and Hyde.
I think that's very fair. And I do think that has to be our standard, is we don't have 28 and 29-year-old Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer anymore either. And, to give credence to the other side of it, Damar Hamlin was third on the team in tackles. Like, he was third on the team in tackles. Like, he was
very
making
disruptive.
3 quarterback hits. He had 1.5 sacks. He was breaking up plays. He was making an impact on defense. And I do think we need to see another step forward. But if he gets to a point, which again won't be this season, where he can be the primary starter there, I think that he would have that preparation.
Yep.
So before we move on to corners, let's talk a little bit quickly about just having Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer back. I think that we saw what a luxury they had been when we had 5 straight seasons of them on the field virtually every single snap, and how impactful it was to not have them for the first time. You saw a less than 100% Jordan Poyer being put in a position where he was having to try to make up for the fact that he didn't have Micah Hyde as his, kind of center fielder behind him. And I think it impacted both his play and the fact that we didn't have Micah Hyde. So yeah, I certainly am hopeful that we get them back. I'm going to manage my expectations that I don't know that we're going to get, prime number one, same exact level Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde back, but I expect them to be good, and I expect many of the other pieces around them to let them play at that very high level. Maybe it's not all pro level anymore, but that very high level and impactful level. We'll just be crossing our fingers for help.
Yeah, when thinking about coming on, knowing we were gonna have this talk tonight, talking about these guys, I really just kept coming back to my mind, like trying to frame it that I think there's still a lot of people out there that think it's 2019, 2020 Poyer and Hyde, and I don't know that it's going to be. And I'm not setting up my expectation that it's going to be. And if it is, awesome. Like, this is great. We're defying the odds. Like, this is fantastic. I'm expecting it to not look exactly the same. I'm expecting it to have some frustrating flaws as these guys age out of positions. But what is going to be good is what they lack now, maybe in athleticism, or maybe what they're lacking in the ability to do some of the stuff that they've been able to do, is knowing this defense hands in and hands. Like, with all of the changes that may come with the Sean McDermott defense, we heard Micah Hyde talk about it this offseason. Like, not that much has changed in how they're just getting to their spots, right? Like, they're still a zone defense. They're still going to run a lot of the same looks. These guys know it. They can communicate it seamlessly without even communicating where to be. And I think that was probably the biggest. If you put Jordan Poyer on the spot last year, even as good as Hamlin played, and he would speak as good as Hamlin played, probably the hardest part about his season outside of playing with injury is not knowing where that other guy was going to be, if he was going to be in his spots, and worrying about where everyone is. Even at linebacker positions, there's people in and out, like always kind of adjusting the defense. He's not going to have to do that anymore. That's going to be a seamless thing. And so with what they're maybe losing, I think they've gained in wisdom within the defense. I think even a 80% Poyer and Hyde is going to be better than top half of the league. 10 other, maybe 10 other teams have a better situation at safety than 80% Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. So it's a huge win to get these guys back. If they can stay healthy, this Bills defense can remain at the top. But that if gets bigger now, right?
So you could take a break here. I need to rant for a second.
Please.
So White Town's King asked a totally fair question, because I think there's a lot of people with the same perception. So I'm not picking on him. He's making a totally a very common comment that a lot of people have felt this way. So one, Siran Neal is only a special teams player. We've determined that. If you want to argue, is that worth investing in? I think that's fine. But this other idea that based on the new special teams rules, we don't need special teams players anymore is people have ran so far, too far with that. I want to explain a couple of things really quickly. So one, Siran Neal's primary position is gunner. Gunner is only on punt returns, is on punt coverage. That doesn't change at all. We're going to have the exact same amount of punts and the exact same amount of punts you have to cover. That's his primary role. He's also obviously one of our best people on kickoff coverage. The NFL has stated their move to do this was monitor in the last 5 years in college. When college introduced the fair catch rule, it reduced their amount of kick returns by 5%. Last year, the NFL had almost 39% of kicks returned. Their goal is to reduce that by 5%, from 39% to 34%. It's not eliminating anything. It's the exact same as what we've had before.
Right.
They're hoping for a 5% reduction. We're still going to need that. Matter of fact, we've had a lot of people talking. Bill Belichick talked about this. They think that many teams who have a strong return team and feel good about their returns are going to return more because of this comment. Because if there are teams who start to, let's take, for example, that last year everybody wanted to keep Isaiah Hodgins, that all of a sudden, if you keep those extra wide receivers and all of a sudden, hey, Isaiah, we need you to go cover some kick returns, but don't worry, they're not going to take it back anyways. And now all of a sudden, Deontay Hardy or Nyheim Hines takes it to the house because you have a bunch of Isaiah Hodgins trying to tackle them. All of a sudden, teams are going to take more returns back, and having guys that can tackle are going to matter. So don't get me wrong, I'm fine.
It's only a 1 year thing, right?
I would prefer to have a cheaper guy and have it be rookie contract guys at linebacker and safety and corner and maybe tight end or wide receiver if you need them. I would prefer that. That would be even better. But this idea that teams aren't going to need special teams anymore is very common. A lot of people are repeating it because people are bringing it up. It is not accurate. It is not going to become the end of special teams.
It also doesn't, in my opinion, apply to the Siran Neal type players of special teams. I don't know that. I think we still, even as a fan base, underestimate how good he is in that world of the NFL. He is an elite gunner. I don't think he's like a good gunner. He might be the Slater of this generation if you can put it together long term.
And if you want to question, does that now impact the Tyler Medikeviches of the world, who's not a gunner, and most of his primary value was on kickoff coverage? Yes. I think that is fair.
If Taron Jones was still around, those guys that are not their position.
Yes. And if you are in a spot where you used to keep 3 or 4 guys and now there's one less, I think that's possible, but it won't be the 2 gunners because you still need them. You still have to, and you cannot just throw some guy and be like, oh, hey, Christian Benford, we need to hope that you can be a good gunner. We don't know that. Like, there still needs to be a skill that exists to be able to go and cover. So a lot of people feel that way. I've gotten a ton of those comments. So it's certainly not like Whitetown's asking a good question. There's a lot of people who have assumed that. I think the shift is way less impactful than what other people in the media have tried to make it seem.
Yeah.
All right. So let's switch over and talk about cornerback here. First, we get Tre'Davious White back. I love hearing Sal and so many other people that are out there watching them at some of the mini camps saying, like, Sal posted the one video and talked about seeing that old Trey back, like stick his foot in the ground and fire off and be able to cut hard and have that confidence back. I think a lot of people went way too far last year in one saying that Trey White had a bad season. He didn't. If you look like his season and all the actual analytical stats of, yards given up, targets thrown at, the actual results of what happened when teams tried to throw at him, it was actually on par with his All-Pro season when he got voted as an All-Pro. So this idea that he got picked on or had a bad season is crazy, but that was him trying to round back into form. And I think that having him at a healthy spot where he's still 28, he's not some like over the hill guy. I'm excited to have Trey White back.
Everyone should be. This is going to sound super condescending, but I'm okay with that. I don't think anyone has reasonable conversations about defensive backs. I just don't.
You
Like,
can't watch it on the broadcast. You can't.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a while. I've talked a lot. I think I understand defensive back maybe more than any position in football for myself, like how I watch the game. And I do. I think on the broadcast, it's very bad for defensive backs because you don't know what's going on in coverage. You don't know whose responsibilities are what. And so you just see a play, you see the end result of a play. And we are so wired to think of every reception as this terrible thing, not understanding that most plays actually end in the reception. Like 60% is a normal percentage to give up. So most plays are going to end in the reception. But then when it happens to us, it's like, that guy sucks. This guy can't turn his head around, whatever it is. Like the conversation is never reasonable about defensive backs, especially with Trey. It's weird how polarizing he's been in the fan base, because you would think he does all the right things, he says all the right things, he has the right attitude. Like there's no reason for him to be polarizing. His play has matched the accolades that he's got, and just, I don't know, I couldn't imagine not being excited to get him back. And I think he was still ramping up last year. To your point, I think he played better than most people thought. You could see in some of the movement that he didn't have, like Joe or like that Sal and those guys were saying, that swag. He didn't have that totally back yet. He was gaining that confidence back. If he gets it back and it is real and he has that confidence back in himself, this is what changes everything, guys. Like this makes it so that the Bills are like, good, we can hang, you can play, you can win a lot of games, to having an elite level shut down a half of a field type corner that certain QBs with bad arms, I'm talking about Mac Jones, like these types of guys, aren't even gonna test. Like maybe against the Joe Burrows and the Mahomes, he still gives up some stuff, but this is a guy that operates at a level when he's playing his best that eliminates an entire side of the field. And this is what the mad genius of Sean McDermott now can scheme up. If all these guys stay healthy, Poyer, Hyde, Trey, the stuff you can do now with the athletic Elam, this is the stuff everybody wanted to finally get to the way where it's like, hey, we can take half the field away with Trey, roll some help with this uber athletic Elam guy, let him jump some balls, but he's got a blanket and Micah Hyde or whatever it is. Now that mad genius can go. So if Trey's back to confident, this is that step forward, the evolution of the defense. And so I'm hoping, I'm assuming it's going that way. Everything we hear shows it going that way, but this might be the most exciting thing. The Bills fan base should be looking at this as the biggest free agency get you could have had, is getting a healthy Trey White back here going into this year.
So just to give a couple stats to help support it, last year, some corners who had like under a 60% reception percentage, like the number of balls that got caught when they got targeted, JC Horn and Patrick Surtain are 59%. You have, some Casey Hayward, DJ Reed, who's a super popular guy, Asante Samuel Jr. at 56%, Tariq Woolen, who everyone loved, at 55.3%. Well, guess what? Trey White was at 54.8. He was better than all those guys. He was in the top 20 in the NFL. You look at just a general stat, like, passer rating against, like what kind of distance and what else got picked up there. Again, guys who had really good seasons, Jalen Ramsey, some of the best corners in the NFL in the 70s, Bradley Roby, another guy who had a good, a rough season, but actually played a little better than people thought. Right there, Trey White, 18th in the NFL at 73.2. That was in his down year when he played bad last year. I just think that people really struggled to put into context what he was trying to work through coming back to be able to play. And now being able to have him healthy, I'm excited to see what it is.
I say it every time we talk about these injuries, and I think that we also still need to feel this way about Von Miller, is for the most part, and I know that some people have gotten back healthier earlier, but I don't think it happens within that first season after rehab. I think there's confidence that needs to be built back up. Like, you're not back to yourself a full season and a half. So I'm expecting Trey to really hit his stride here mid-season this season as he comes back this year. And that's, if he is, man, I think he's going to remind a lot of people just how good he was. I'm not exaggerating. I don't take it lightly to say a defensive back can split a field in half, but we've seen him do that, right? Like, he has that type of capability.
So then one other that doesn't have any questions around it, Taron Johnson, I think has really solidified himself as one of the best nickels in the NFL. I think for sure a top 10, likely a top 5 nickel cornerback in the NFL. And I think is a guy that we just don't have to worry about. I think that he's a good player that is going to be in that position, is going to be here for a long time. And honestly, for me, is probably an extension candidate this offseason, or I wouldn't be shocked if during the year we hear about his contract being extended because, he's going into just 1 year left on that deal in 2024. He's an easy one where he's now playing really well. I think that we can easily add another 2 or 3 years onto that and maintain it. But I'll give you a moment to talk. I know you're a huge fan of Taron.
I love this. This is like my favorite somewhat success story of the Bills. I've loved him since I first saw him, and he has really been consistent. He's allowed Sean McDermott to make this evolution to being a nickel defense. He's really now you're seeing other teams draft guys in this mold that you time and time again here throughout the draft. We saw nickel corner. It's becoming a priority in the NFL to get a defender. And here's the thing, Greg, that my biggest thing about, I love him. I love his makeup and his character, but this position specifically, nickel defender in the modern NFL, I don't think it's getting enough credit. I don't think it gets enough recognition. I think it needs its own all pro listing. You're talking about the shiftiest athletes that you're going up against. They will put you in position with Stephon Diggs will come into the slot and position into the slot. And you have to guard guys like that in space without a boundary. You have linebacker responsibilities. You're passing off in zone to 3 different positions, safeties, linebackers, corners. Like they're playing against the whole field. Most of the time they're off coverage. You can't even get hands on the receivers that you're playing up against. I think there's more on the plate of a nickel defender than anywhere else. It used to just be throw with your third best corner out there and play nickel. Now it's a specialized position that the mold for that is a Taron Johnson. Like he has developed the mold for this.
The Dolphins have been trying to move ways. They want to play Jalen Ramsey at nickel because it's such a valuable position and they want to have talent in that spot.
Yeah, I love it, and so I'm glad that he's going to get some recognition. I love that you're wish casting him an extension here.
I expect it. I really feel strongly that we're going to see that.
This is another Taylor Rapp spot. They've struggled where if Taron goes down, who is now that guy? Is it Cam Lewis? I think Rapp can be that, and I think Rapp can mirror Taron in your dime looks. Like I think they can play similar.
So someone else brought up about that. Oh, you could have Hyde back there and have Poyer and Rapp there, and I didn't have time to chime in, but now that you brought it up, it's actually the fact that you can mirror Taron and Rapp on either side of Milano, where you have Milano kind of roam in the middle and you have Taron and Rapp on either side of them with Poyer and Hyde behind them. That's what it frees up to allow you to do.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so those two are the locks. We know what they're going to do. I'm now going to work from the bottom up with a couple other positions. Jamarcus Ingram, 7th round pick, Alex Austin, recent signee, Cam Dantzler, and I'm going to even throw in Cam Lewis. You could tell me a story where one of those guys fights for that 53rd roster spot. I won't be shocked if one of those guys forces them to keep a 6th cornerback because of the other 3 guys I'm about to bring up. I won't be a shock there, but I don't think any of them have an actual shot to start, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them tonight. Cam Dantzler was really, really bad, but we've also reclaimed other people in the secondary,
especially in the secondary,
and help them find their potential. And Cam Dantzler was drafted in the 3rd round for a reason. Many people thought he'd be a 1st rounder. I think a lot of that work ethic and off the field stuff that made him fall from the 1st to the 3rd obviously
showed up,
proved itself out to be the case. The reason we got him for free in May or whenever the heck we signed him. But he is 6'2". There are some interesting tools
practice
there.
Squad candidate, I would assume.
Absolutely a guy that is worth kind of hanging around to see if we can mold him into something. But again, I don't expect anything impactful in the 2023 season out of him.
Yeah,
which brings us to
this is why it's hard, because I think the Bills have some depth here. Like we talk about these guys like they're not that good, but there's some depth here to keep a guy like that off your roster.
Well, and they drafted Alex Austin. We've seen other heck last year. Christian Benford was the 6th round pick. We didn't expect anything from him. I did not expect him to make the roster going into camp.
I didn't expect him to start.
I did not expect him to start week 1. So again, Cam Lewis has been, he's trying to take Dean Marlowe's roster cockroach nickname. He hasn't been able to be kicked off the team, so he's continued to fight for a backup kind of DB secondary, whatever they want to call him. They've called.
I would classify him as the practice squad guy. He's gotten opportunities when it gets dinged up during the season. He's the guy that gets pulled up. He's not the.
He's that baseball 4A guy. Like
Yeah.
you're too good for AAA, but you're not quite good enough for the majors. So you kind of float back and forth. That's Cam Lewis. So that leaves us with Kaiir Elam, Dane Jackson, and Christian Benford. Aaron, who's going to start?
It should be Kaiir Elam, right? Like you drafted him. I don't totally agree with everybody's value of late first round picks, even trading up for him. But you did draft him, even if, which I believe is more, he's closer to a second round grade guy. You still want that guy to start here, right? I think he should be that guy, especially like I talked about with a healthy Trey White back and you're getting your safeties back. In theory, on paper, the stuff that you should be able to do with that more athletic corner that you drafted is do some more complex stuff. Run man, press man on one side of the field with some help over the top, and then have your quarters coverage on the other side of the field. Like, good luck, Mac Jones, figuring out what we're doing and what it looks like and what we're able to accomplish with these types of athletes. And so that's the best case scenario for the Bills. With that said, I do want to pump the brakes a little bit on this idea that if either Dane Jackson or Christian Benford get that job, we've seen Benford win it or outright the first time. It does, like, we had this argument a little bit offline, so I'm careful how to phrase it. I think people that are going with the idea that now makes Kaiir Elam a bust is too far. That's too far of a statement. Your point was it's still not good that these lower value guys beat him out. But I do think these players are capable NFL starting caliber players. I think Dane Jackson's an adequate starting caliber cornerback too, with all these good pieces around him. I think he's even, maybe slightly better than adequate. I don't know on Benford. I don't know really where he is, but I know he beat out Kaiir Elam the first time. And we saw the same level of play that you would expect out of the Dane Jacksons, Levi Wallace's, but some more of the physicality, which is what we wanted to see from Kaiir Elam, some of that ability to break up the ball and get his hands on the ball. And so if he's presenting that in spades in training camp, like those are the paths that I see of like, yeah, Elam's got the more athleticism and he was drafted ahead of him, but this guy just keeps getting his hands on the ball. Like, yes, it's a bad thing for Elam in that vacuum, but it's still a good thing for the Bills, right?
Yeah. So I think our worst case scenario is really good. We have 3 guys who are starting caliber players in the NFL. Now, whether you think they're good or not is debatable. I don't think any of them played at a really good level, but adequate and that, far better, it's the same stats I was
There's
looking
like
at
Goldilocks,
before.
right? One has the higher ceiling, one has the lower floor, one is kind of in between. Like,
yeah, so Dane Jackson led up, his passer rating against was 81.9. That was 38th in the NFL. Kaiir Elam was 83.7. That's 44th in the NFL. Those are pretty good numbers. The number of catches they led up against was 58 and 63. Like they were still good numbers. They're same as Stephon Gilmore, same as Rock Ya-Sin, same as Darius Slay. The good cornerbacks. They're in that ballpark where they weren't nearly as bad as people brought up. My biggest concern is I don't think either Dane Jackson I don't think Christian Benford does, but I guess it's feasible. We'll see. I don't think either of them have the ceiling to be what we need Kaiir Elam to be to allow this defense to take another significant step forward. The only player that has the ceiling to really allow for the aggression that we want to see and not putting everything at Trey's feet and not putting everything on the safety net of 2 32-year-old safeties is for Kaiir Elam to play like a first rounder. So the idea of how bad it is and whether it immediately makes him a bust after a second year, you've very aptly used Leonard Floyd as an example, where when he left Chicago, people were certain that he was a bust, and he went to the Rams, and in his 4 years there, he was top 10 in the NFL in sacks.
And now we're super excited to get him.
And now we're happy to get him. So, so whether he's a bust or not is irrelevant, because that's not, you can't decide that instantly. Guys who are busts are, Damon Arnett, who was drafted around the same time that Kaiir Elam was drafted, was out of the league after his second year. Like, that's a bust. So the label doesn't matter. But my biggest frustration is when people try to say it's not a big deal, it doesn't matter because we'd have somebody else starting. Well, it does matter. We traded up using a first round pick to get him. That was as big of an investment as we can make. That's the biggest resource that we have. And losing the capacity and the potential of what we intended that to be is bad and does hurt the defense, because now we're like, okay, well, I guess we're not going to get what we thought we were going to get, but we still have this adequate, reasonable guy who won't,
Right.
get roasted.
Maybe
but,
he's a Leotis McKelvin more than he is another Tre'Davious White or something like that.
It's if you watch the ESPYs, Justin Jefferson made the play because we didn't have somebody to knock the ball down. I'd like to have a first round pick that would have knocked the ball down and would have made a play on the ball. So I think I obviously can tell myself a story where one of those guys beat him out, because I just watched it last year. 12 months ago, I watched them beat him out. I just need to see that, hey, what we saw towards the end of the year, his trending of how good his play on the field was, because guys that I trust more than me, like Eric, have said he played better than those two when he was on the field. We couldn't see the things of why he was not starting over them, because when he played, he was better than them on the field. So I need to think that he is going to do the things in practice that earn the coach's trust to let him play, because it's really frustrating that whatever he did, and I trust him. John Butler is a freaking phenomenal secondary coach. If he says he wasn't the guy to start, then he wasn't, because he's really good at this. I need him to do those things and to be what he was supposed to be.
Yeah, and add to that, last year, like, people can say what they want about Leslie Frazier. He's a very good football coach and a really bright mind. Yeah. And Sean McDermott and Butler, the things that they have been able to do with defensive secondaries in the NFL is really top notch in the NFL right now. And so, yeah, something was going on in the practices. And really, that's again, maybe it lingers into this year. I do think one thing that goes underrated in this defense with Sean McDermott, which carries weight, is he believes in the scheme, probably to his detriment more than
probably to a fault. Yeah,
probably a little bit too much. And if Dane Jackson is where he's supposed to be every time, that matters to Sean McDermott on what defense he's going to call. For Christian Benford's that guy, like being where he's supposed to be versus making some of the crazy higher end plays. I think Sean McDermott's going to defer to the people that are doing it the way that he wants it in the scheme. And so I don't know if that's going to translate for Elam or whatever. I still don't even know what he was doing in practice or not. But if you see even a rotation this year, which we've seen Sean McDermott do with that cornerback 2 spot as a rotation, that to me tells me they don't fully trust whichever player it is to be in position every single time. And so they're kind of trying to add a crutch to that. But either way, when we look at their stats from last year, whether it's Dane, Elam, Benford, we also have to remember majority of that wasn't with Trey. And a lot of it was with a banged up Trey. Playing cornerback 2 in the NFL is a lot different than what Dane Jackson had to roll out at the start of the year last year of playing a lot of cornerback 1. He's not supposed to be that guy. When he filled in for Trey after the injury and then going forward into last year, like, he was essentially playing out of position. Obviously he's a boundary corner, and you will get matched up there. But if teams were able to really expose some of these guys that are all, in my opinion, cornerback 2s when they were lined up to be a cornerback 1, and that's not fair. And I think some of the statistics need to be looked at in that light as well.
Yeah, and I think there's pieces to be debated on either side of that. And that my biggest frustration is, I think that idea of, hey, he's in the right spot, he's where I can trust him to be, matters over the long haul of the regular season. In the playoffs, when it's against the other really, really good teams, you need the guy who's going to make a play is going to be able to, and I that like security and trust of like, yeah, but he's not going to mess up horribly. Well, guess what? Sometimes Tyreek Hill can just outrun all your guys anyways, and go. You need a guy who can make a play and stop that from happening. And that part of it, what frustrates me is, maybe if you gave Kaiir Elam more snaps, he would have worked through those things and gotten to that point and taken advantage of the development that we talk about and what they've turned Taron Johnson into and what they've turned Micah Hyde into and what they turned Jordan Poyer into. None of them. Well, so I specifically didn't mention him because all those guys weren't the investment that Kaiir Elam was. And when you made that same investment with Trey White, you played him every single snap, right, wrong, or indifferent, and let him work through it.
Yeah. Well, he was also the best cornerback the day he walked in that room.
Sure.
Which
And
helped him.
correct. And I think everything that I saw, because I can't watch practice, so was Kaiir Elam. Because when I watched him on the field, he was better than those two guys.
Yeah.
And that's what frustrates me, is that I'm not nearly as good at this as what they are. Why didn't you want to let him work through those things? It just frustrates me.
They
to
are going
not
to trust the
understand
scheme.
the investment, and then seeing the investment seem to be better, and you still held back and hedged.
So I got a lot of pushback when I talked about this concept of like, don't think it's a bust if he doesn't run away with the starting job. Like I expect it. I think he should. I think those are fair conversations. I think saying that if it doesn't happen, it's not good. Like that's okay. That expectation though, like Sean McDermott has told us himself that rookie development window is a 3-year window for him, whether we agree with it or not, whether analytics agrees with it or not, none of that matters, because that's what he and Brandon Beane are really based on how they judge these guys off of. And so for them, it's not a rush. And that's frustrating because I agree with you. Come the playoffs, like I felt like the defense, that's probably my biggest gripe with Sean McDermott, is I think that he maybe overdid we're going to have all the perfect coverages and you're going to have to throw such perfect balls. But when you try to play that way and don't just let players play and let them play free and play your best players, I think you get into a little bit of trouble. You seize up in the moment. And I want the best players we have playing fast. And on paper, when I put that out, it's Trey and Elam lined up on the outside and those guys playing fast. And so I agree with you that like in order to do the things you want to accomplish with the defense, or at least how I visualize it on paper, that's got to be the guy.
Yeah. And I think Chris does a great job. He's a great follow on Twitter as well. Helped out with the fun show we did, the week before with our what if draft. I don't want anyone to win a starting job because of draft status. I want him to start because he's better than the other guys, because I watched him be better. He was better than Christian Benford. He was better than Dane Jackson. I want him to keep playing because he's better than them. Cody Ford was never better. They kept trying to force him to play because of the draft status. I don't want him to play. He was drafted high because I watched what he did in Florida. He was really freaking good. He was a universal first-round pick by everyone. Everyone had him ranked in that area. That's the reason they had to trade up for him. And then when he played, he was better than those guys. It makes me crazy that they put him back on the bench.
I got to watch back because I haven't, and I don't remember that one. But I also do think Dane and Benford played better than people, at least in my mentions, are giving him credit for. Dane, I'm been told Dane was trash. Like Dane played terrible. Dane was
fun. They were like, fun.
You don't get 10 pass breakups of just being total trash in the NFL. Yeah. Like he played at an acceptable level and an adequate level. But I want to watch Elam because I thought Elam wasn't that, like, it didn't stand out to me as much better. But I trust Eric and I trust Anthony. So, but it's an exercise I wanted to do here this offseason. I just have not had a reason to.
And just some,
but even without that, he should still win it.
Yeah, in the playoff game, when the Dolphins knew, hey, we're actually in this and have a shot at it, they tried to let Tyreek Hill win the game, and Kaiir Elam broke up the pass and sniffed out the bubble screen.
Yeah.
And didn't let them win the game. I don't know that I feel confident that Dane Jackson or Christian Benford had the athleticism to not let Tyreek Hill beat them, and Kaiir Elam didn't. That's why you drafted him in the first round, is that exact situation. In a playoff game with an elite talent like Tyreek Hill, he did not let him steal a game they didn't deserve because he could match some of that elite athleticism with his capabilities. That's what we want. So, I think, again, we have the luxury that the floor is very healthy and that our worst case scenario as a team is very, very good. There's no chance we're going to get destroyed at cornerback 2 because we have 3 guys who would probably start for more than a third of the NFL. And they would start in a lot of different situations.
Up here.
Asked if some of them could be traded.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's definitely the position that you're flush in terms of that type of depth. But
the one exception would be if all of a sudden
Dantzler
Alex Austin or Dantzler was
Right.
another Christian Benford situation, and that specifically Austin, and that holy crap, we have another guy on a 4-year rookie deal who's way, way better than his draft status. I can't believe we stumbled on another one. All of a sudden, the fact that Dane Jackson's on a 1-year deal makes that doable, but it would
Right.
need to be Benford and Elam are both playing as well as we saw last year and better. And one of those younger guys really shocks and like, holy crap, we cannot expose this guy to waivers. He's too good from a contract standpoint,
Right.
not anything else. From a contract standpoint, Dane Jackson is on a 1-year deal and all the money goes with him. All $2 million goes with him. You would have zero dead cap. He would just go with and be.
He's got legitimate starts. If somebody has an injury at camp or something like that and needs a cornerback too, he's got legitimate starts and in big games. He's played some big games.
In theory, the most tradable asset in that group. I do not expect that to happen. I expect all those guys to be on the team.
I think they will be.
Those other guys to push them, whether we keep 5 or 6. I think those 5 are a lock. I think Trey White, Taron Johnson, Kaiir Elam, Christian Benford, Dane Jackson, those 5 are a lock. That they are going to be there.
And that makes me feel really good in this type of NFL because I think we talk a lot about those starters, obviously, for a reason, but these other guys are going to play. You're going to get some run at that in this position, the way this game is.
Almost nobody plays every game in the NFL nowadays anyways. It's really hard to play every game.
Yeah, you're going to get these guys some run. And I feel good. Like if you have a window where one of these guys, even in the back in Poyer and Hyde, like if you run into a stretch where I think that's what happened. The worst part of last year and the injuries that they had was when Jordan Poyer needed a week or two, you couldn't take that week or two. You didn't have a guy. I feel a lot better about the way that they've shaped this roster this year, where Trey can take a week if there's an ankle thing that flares up or something like that. And we can get through. I'm not saying you'll play at that same type of level, but really any of these starters, I feel like the depth can come in and get you through a stretch and that you're going to be okay. You've got starter quality level floor across the board.
Yeah. So again, I think there's reason to be optimistic about the upside that we have. I think there's reason to feel confidence in the floor of what they have, and that puts us in a great position where the depth that they have, the fact that we're probably going to roll out here with 10 DBs and they're all going to be that it's going to be within reason to argue that Dane Jackson is probably a starting caliber corner for another 10 teams in the NFL, and he might be our 9th best defensive back, is pretty freaking amazing. Like that's an awesome position to be in, where you're not sure if Damar Hamlin or Dane Jackson or Christian Benford is your 7th, 8th, and 9th best DB. That's an awesome position to be in, and certainly speaks to what a skill and strength this scouting department, front office, and coaching staff have with the defensive back group. And that's why we should feel so excited about this season and what these guys are going to give.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really sneaky. There's obviously bigger position battles, right? Starting linebacker or how Spencer Brown looked. There's bigger things that are going to matter more to this team, but there's some of that stuff and how it's going to work out in terms of the depth. Seeing what Taylor Rapp is like, I think some of the most interesting battles and storylines are going to be going on in that DB room.
And another great point by Chris here, considering how hit we were by injuries last year. I'd rather keep them all. Let's just, I don't want to have,
you can't have enough DBs
when Jamarcus Ingram had to play. I don't need that anxiety in my.
And thank God we don't have to do the Juwan Johnson thing again. Think about the two safeties you have. Like
Jaquan
you don't have to roll that back out.
Oh, he was that like such a perfect example of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer had played every single game. So the idea of Jaquan Johnson ended up being significantly better than the reality.
He also had a really cool preseason. He against like the fourth stringers. He was
that weird toe tap. Yeah, the interception that nobody can forget. Yeah. All right, so one party note here. Normally Friday night has been the Greg Tompsett Sports Show, and my
thanks for sharing with me.
Support there. Yeah, it's fun. Thank you for coming on. And we've been able to do some of these over the summer. We always have a wonky schedule, so we mishmash some of them together. But one fun thing that we do on the Greg Tompsett Sports Show is Chris tries to make me look dumb. And that's his favorite part of the show, is trying to pull up trivia to see if he can, make us look silly. And he included you here. So
I'm
Greg
easy to make look dumb.
Don't know.
Actually.
So, but he did it, and he specifically asked if you would be on because he knows how you love adequate secondary play. So the first question Which DB has the most interceptions in their Bills career? A. Nate Odoms, B. Mark Kelso, C. Butch Bird, famously Jarius Bird's father, and D. Tony Green. We get a hint. The player is tied with Nate Clements and Tom Janik for the Bills' most career pick sixes with 5. So again, Odoms, Kelso, Butch Bird, and Tony Green.
I'm gonna go with it's Butch Bird.
Butch Bird. Okay. I like it. I know it's not Nate Odoms because it's just too easy that it would be there, and he's sneaky. I'm gonna go with Tony Green because that's the least obvious name, and he's sneaky like that. I was Butch Bird. Great call.
Butch Bird is better than, like, I remember when Jarius Bird was here, like, and I didn't know much about Butch. They're like, oh, his dad played, and I don't freaking know that era. But and I looked up, I was like, dang, like, usually when they say like, oh, his dad played, it was like a year or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, cool.
But
he played.
So for our conversation earlier, Kaiir Elam's father, Abram Elam, was a guy fighting for roster spots here and there, and he did carve out like an 8-year career, but it was on like 4 or 5 different teams and always like trying to claw for a roster spot. Butch Bird was like 40 interceptions is a legit amount of interceptions. That is a real amount.
Yeah, I think it was like a baller, and his son was too.
Like, Jarius, God, dude, don't get me started on how cheap our franchise was. Now we didn't know how to use the salary cap back then, and why we couldn't keep players at Jarius Bird. But I'll get on a whole new rant. All right, one more question here.
Okay.
Who is the most perfectly adequate DB to ever play for the Bills?
I hate everyone so much. It's
so awesome.
It's for sure Jabari Greer.
Ken Irvin, Keon Carpenter, John.
But the real answer is Levi Wallace.
His perfect adequacy was measured perfectly adequate by metrics that are perfectly adequate. Whoever Aaron picked, he's the expert here.
It was Jabari Greer. Honestly, you left Levi Wallace out.
Oh, yes,
Levi Wallace is the answer. Adequacy.
Quick shout out, who our guy Kyle Salagi would have put on here if we left it
Lafayette Pitts. I thought he was going to be on there. Yeah,
same. I when I saw that, I almost wondered. I was like, is that Lafayette
John
Pitts
Pitt's
like real first name? Is that like his real first name? Like we don't know and we just call him Lafayette Pitts.
And actually, Jabari Greer was probably better than adequate.
He really might have been. He really might have been. So shout out, that's Chris Seth, who helps me out on the Greg Thompson Sports Show, does a great job there. But tonight we've had our man Chris Kepner here with us, as he always is, being able to help us out. Any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
I got nothing, man. Summer's flying by. It's crazy. I think I got 2 more shows where I'm here with you, and then I'm off again for 2 weeks. And I'm bummed, though. I'm not going to get to see you guys this summer. I'm going to be out of town when everybody's coming in. And so that's really bumming me out. So hopefully we can still get through training camp together, even though I'm not going to get to be there next to you and doing all those things.
I will miss you there. That does make me sad. And for the meetup, we'll be announcing that pretty soon. We've also had some interesting discussions with potentially a new sponsor partner that could be announced pretty soon. We're excited about that. And I will say Heather is on the ball helping us out here. You guys know how the internet works. You got to give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review. If you're here and you've been watching, hit the like button on the way out. It really makes a big difference. Come and leave us a comment. Come and, if you thought I was crazy about thinking it had to be Kaiir Elam and you think that Christian Benford is the future at cornerback for the Buffalo Bills, leave a comment. Let us know that. It really goes a long ways. It's the way the internet works. The more things that you press buttons on, the more it tells other people about it. So if you want to help us out and figure out a way to do that, that is your best way to help us out.
Yeah, make fun of me for the camera going out for a little bit. You can also do that. That also helps the algorithm. That's
it honestly doesn't know if they're positive or negative comments. The internet doesn't actually
so just
know
yell at me.
Nice things or bad things. So you can say bad things and it may hurt our feelings a little bit, but actually helps us. So we'll take it. But we appreciate it very much, guys. Thank you to our awesome producer, Chris Kepner. The chat was fantastic. This is late Friday night and you guys were killing it, jumping on here with us. So
appreciate everybody.
Very much. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've listened to the Cover One Buffalo podcast, and we